Hello, my name is Paulette of Korssia Wolfe Dorflaufer. My book is in the Washington Holocaust Museum in the library and also in Yad Vashem in Israel and also in Paris in the Holocaust Museum. I begin my story where I'm from. Everything I tell you, I found out years later in 65, 71, and 1972. So everything before then, I didn't know anything. I'm from Marseille, France. My father was a waiter. My family came from Spain, from Oran, Algeria, where rose gold is made, and then also Marseille. My mother and father were first cousins. My mother had 10 children. They lived in Oran, Algeria, and my father wanted to move to Marseille. So my mother wrote to her brother in Marseille who owned a tavern. First he was a taxi driver, then he owned his tavern. And he said, yes, come and I will help Yaya. That was my father's name, and my mother's name is Tamar. Tamar means fruit tree or date tree. So they left with 6 children. Before they left, they had a son, and he passed away. So now the 5 children and my mother and my father took the boat over to Marseille, which is the seaport. And when they got off the boat, there was an apartment. My father said, we'll stay here. So we stayed there in I believe it was a 2-bedroom apartment. And my father, as I said, was a waiter. My uncle did help him with the restaurant, finding restaurants, and he worked there. And then the neighbors would come and bring food and clothing and toys to all the children. So my mother stayed there. Now, my father has a friend who works on a boat, and he wanted to marry my sister, who was 16. Her name was Fortune. And he came home, he told the family, and my sister said, no, I don't want to marry him, I'm 16. And he was early 20s. And my father said, yes, you must marry him, because the man was giving my father money after they got married. They get married, they live in a town called Les Distruce. It was a Catholic town. It had a bar, a restaurant, a cemetery, a pharmacy, lots of mountains, and town hall. So in I believe, Hitler came through Paris in 1940. Before that, it was Kristallnacht. And my mother in 1942 decided to move to Les Distruce. She took all the children. They lived in a 1-bedroom apartment. Next door was a house, and the people's name were Carol. And she had a vegetable garden. And there, the neighbors would bring food and toys and clothing to the children. Now my mother is, she's expecting me. It's 1943. Yes. She goes to the hospital, comes back, And now it's 1944, and I'm a year old. I have a boil on my tushy. I have to go to the hospital to be operated. And we took buses. My mother didn't drive. And she would take the bus all the time during the week to visit my father, to go to Marseille, come back to the children in Les Distrus. So in 1944, I'm in the hospital, and my mother every day waited outside for the bus, and instead of the bus, the Gestapos came. They pushed her into convoy 77, and she's pleading with them, don't take me, I have too many children. They go, and now my brother Jacques, who's the oldest, he's taking care of 5 children. As he hears the truck coming down the driveway, he runs around the building to town hall. And when he reaches town hall, the secretary, Mrs. Martin, who was friends with my mother, pushes him under the desk because 2 more Gestapos are coming. And in this town, you never had to wear Jewish stars because it was a non-Jewish town. So when the Gestapos leave, she says to my brother, go live in the mountains for 3 days. When you're done, go to your sister's apartment. He stayed in the mountains, ate garbage for 3 days. Now the Gestapo is at my apartment and pushes my mother out of the convoy, tells her to pack her bags and bring the children. She brings 5 children with her, 3 girls, 2 boys. They get into the convoy and they go to Camp Drancy, which is about 10-hour ride by car, truck. It's a circular building, no windows, no doors, and then they're on the last train to Auschwitz. And on the train are the pellets for the showers. So they get to Auschwitz, and then the people tell them to get undressed. They think they're coming out, and they're gassed. Now, my father, he was taken 1942, and he was taken to Camp Sobibor. First, he was in a ghetto, and then he was in Camp Drancy. And when he reached Sobibor, they gassed him, and that was in March, and then I was born in May. So, of course, I never met my father. So now I'm in the hospital, and the Gestapos come, and the nurse says, who are you looking for? And they said, we're looking for the Korssia baby. Now, the Gestapos had records on everybody. So the nurse says, no, there's no Korssia baby here. They go from floor to floor. They're on the 5th floor, and they wrap me up in a blanket, and the nurse is yelling, no, give me back my daughter, it's my daughter. And they keep walking and walking. Now they're downstairs, and the nurse says, give me back my daughter, you have the wrong child. So then they go outside, they're holding me, and the nurse is saying, give me back my daughter. And the Gestapo stands there and holds me and looks at her and throws me at her. She catches me, she brings me inside the hospital, and the nuns take care of me. So every time I see a nun, I have to hug a nun. So then she goes to my sister's apartment and tells her, Fortune, hurry up and go get Paulette. out of the hospital. Fortune is married, has a daughter, Rosette, and she later on has a son who dies at a year old. He falls out of the high chair. So, so now I go to my sister, and Jacqueline is there, my other sister. And we stay with Fortune, and then we go to displacement camp in the south of France. And we stay there for about a month and a half. We get 3 meals a day, which was wonderful. And then we go back to Fortune's apartment. Now, Fortune works in a hospital, and on her way, she met a man and Michelle, and they fell in love. So now he wants to go to Oran, and so what she does is she puts Jacqueline in one orphanage called Saint Germain in Paris. They do it by age groups. And then I'm put into another orphanage. I'm about 3 years old, 2.5, 3, and I'm put in La Petite Mode. And the Oze, the Jewish orphan, they own these orphanages. So once I'm there, I never see anybody again. Jacqueline, I believe, was around, I don't know, 10 years old. So now it's 1940. So, Fortune and Michelle go to Algeria, and they stay there. Now it's 1947, and Fortune's husband takes Rosette and puts her in another Rose, and he goes to Oran, Algeria, and he goes, has anyone seen Fortune? To the family, and the family says, no, we haven't seen her. So he comes back, but he never took Rosette out of the orphanage. So now it's 1947, and there's an American family. The name of the lawyer is Mr. Simandl. He's from Newark, and he gets pictures from the orphanage and lays them out on the table, and he calls the people who want to adopt. So the Wolfe family was one of them. And so the people come and they say, oh, I'll take him or her. And so the Wolfe family says, I'll take Paulette. And he goes, well, wait a minute, she has a sister in another orphanage. She's 11 years old. And they say, no, we just want Paulette, that's all. So in 19, I couldn't come over right away because in the orphanage I got impetigo on my chin. It's a dirt disease. So I had to wait till that cleared up. Before I came, my mother told me I was very expensive because they had to pay extra for the chaperone to come and look at the house where I was going to live and the town and the schools and just look around and make sure everything was okay and to meet my family. And also I wasn't allowed to share a room. That was another thing. So now the chaperone comes back to the Oze, and in 1948, another little girl, Mimi, from my orphanage, we, both of us, go on the Queen Elizabeth. It was gorgeous. Apple green seats, I remember. We got 3 meals a day. It was just fabulous. The people were beautiful. So Well, we leave in January, and we arrive to New York February 9th, 1948. And just before we arrive, like 2 or 3 days before, that's when the chaperone tells us we are being adopted by an American couple, a Jewish American couple. So first she took Mimi to her family, and they were quite religious, and they live in South Orange, and my family lived in South Orange, but I never saw Mimi after that day. And then the chaperone stayed with my family, the Wolfe family, for a week because my family didn't speak French. And my mother's showing us around, and we go upstairs, and she gives me this beautiful doll, and I turn it and it plays music. I still have it till this day. It's in my apartment. She's all in yellow. So anyway, then we go downstairs into the kitchen. Oh, and my room was like white and pink, and there was a few pieces of clothes in the closet, because when you're in the orphanage, you wear hand-me-down clothes. When the Gestapo did come to the orphanage, they took us, the Jewish children, and they brought us downstairs, and they put us in a dark room, and we all held hands and held our breath that we wouldn't be taken. And we could hear footsteps. And when they left, then we were allowed to come out again. And they had long wooden tables, and you had to hold on to your food because the children would grab your food and eat it. So now in the house, we're in the kitchen, and my mother's asking me what I want, but I don't understand. So the chaperone asked me, and I said an apple, and my mother looked at her, an apple, because that was special for us when we got fruit. We didn't get fruit that often. So she took an apple, she cut it up, and she put it into the bowl, and I'm holding on to the bowl, and my head is down, and I'm eating. And my mother says to the chaperone, "Why is she eating like that?" And she says, "Because the children used to take the food, and you have to hold on to everything." So she understood. And then another story, my mother and I, we lived in South Orange, so now we're walking towards Seton Hall. And as we're walking towards Seton Hall, I see 3 nuns, and I let go of my mother's hand, and my mother's yelling, "Paulette, come back, come back." And I hold on to their legs, and they're patting me on my head, and then my mother tells them how good they were in the hospital with me. So now, getting back to the story, when I was 15 years old, we had lived in an apartment, and I have a break front, which I have now still, and I open up a drawer, and on the bottom of the drawer, I see my picture when I came to this country, and there was a K, but I didn't know what that meant. Was it a street? Was it my last name? I had no idea. So anyway, I put the picture back. I don't say anything to my parents. So then, as time goes on, I get married. I'm 19 in 1963. And I told my husband, if I ever find family, we must go. And he said, "Oh, yeah, okay." I don't think he thought I would. So anyway, now I have a French decorator. It's, excuse me. in 1965, I had to go to the French embassy with my father. And that's when I learned my name was Korssia, Korssia. And that's when I learned I was from Marseille. That's all I knew. So now it's 1971. I have a French decorator. I live in Livingston in a beautiful house with a pool and everything. And when she speaks, she says that she has the French accent. I said, I'm from France, but I don't know if I have family. She said, well, call the French embassy. I said, you're right. So I called the French embassy, and I get a young girl, and I spell my name, and she said, wait 1 minute. She says, I have to look in an old phone book. She looks in an old phone book. Now she sees the name Korchia, but it's pronounced Korssia also. And I said, you know what? I'll take it. You never know. So she gave me the phone number, and I said to Helene, you call. And it was on a Wednesday at 3:30 in the afternoon. And she calls up, and it was my first cousin on my mother's side. And he goes, oh my goodness, we've been looking for Paulette for so many years. We didn't know what happened to her. He says, tell Paulette she has a brother and 2 sisters alive out of 10 children, which I didn't know either. So Helene writes a letter in French to my sister Fortune. I have a sister Jacqueline, and I have a brother Jacques. I was so excited, I couldn't believe it. That day, my mother was coming for dinner, and I wanted to tell her, but I couldn't. So after my mom had dinner with us, then I told Barry, I found my family, we have to go. So my sister Fortune wrote letters to me, and then I had Helene read them. So in 1972, we flew to France. I was so nervous, and I arrived in Orly Airport the same day I arrived to America, February 9th. So my 2 sisters were at the airport, Jacqueline and Fortune and their children, and the husbands and their children. So we hugged, we kissed. I couldn't understand them except to say bonjour, that was it. And then we stopped somewhere, and I was nervous. I didn't know where we were stopping, but they went and got pastries, and then we went to my sister Fortune's apartment. That's where we stayed. She lived on the 7th floor, no elevator, and I had so much luggage. So the children came and brought up the luggage, and then she says to me, Paulette, she wanted me to write my name. So I wrote my name down, Paulette Renee Wolfe. So she said no. The middle name was not Renee, it was Ren, and I didn't know what that meant. She said it means queen, and I said, oh, my mother picked the right one, but she didn't understand. But anyway, and then we went to my other sister, Jacqueline, her apartment the next day for brunch, and that's when I was going to meet my brother, Jacques, and his wife, Lillian. And it was 12 o'clock, and there was a knock on the door, and my sister said, Jacques, Laporte. And so I got up, and I gave him a hug, and we just connected. That I just loved him to death. He was wonderful. So after the next day, Barry and I left, and we went with Jacques, and we went to different hotels, and we stayed at his condo for a little bit in Marseille he lived. And then later on in years, he built a house in Marseille. And he was a vendor, and he had a wagon. And one day he's there, and there's a young woman walking back and forth. And he goes, "What's the matter? You're walking back and forth." And she says, "I have no money for my son's bar mitzvah." He goes, "Oh, wait a minute." And he has a little tin box in his wagon. He takes out money. He has money in his pocket. He takes out money. He takes her hand and he goes, "This is for you, for your son's bar mitzvah." She's saying, "No." He said, "You have to. It's your son's bar mitzvah." She takes the money. She has people come to her house. She did the cooking, whatever. 2 months later, she comes back. And he goes, "How was the bar mitzvah?" And she said, "Thank you, because of you. You made it wonderful." And she has an envelope in her hand. And she goes to hand him the envelope. And he goes, "Oh, no." He goes, "That's your son's bar mitzvah money. You put it away." So he was just a terrific man, Jacques. Fortune was wonderful and bubbly. They all loved to go out and do and run, do things. Jacqueline was she was sweet, but a little different. And if you said black, she'd say white. But anyway, she also liked to go and do, and she used to meet, she moved to Israel, she and her husband, and every day they would meet the Holocaust survivors from her orphanage. There was about 15 of them. And every morning they had coffee, croissant. And she lived in Netanya, which is beautiful there. Shopping, restaurants, very nice place. So I was so happy to finally meet my family after all these years in 1972. So now I told my mother before I left, I'm going to England and to France. I didn't want to just say France, but she's smart, she knew. So anyway, I come home. I have all the gifts laid out in the dining room, and then I invite her over after the beauty parlor on Friday, and I said, "Mom, I need to talk to you." And we sit down in the kitchen, and I make her coffee. And I said, "Mom, I'm sorry that I lied about going to England," and that's all I said. And she said, "Well, are you moving to France? Is that it?" And I looked at her, and I said, "Mom, let me tell you, anybody can have a child, but it's the person who raises that child." And I said, "You're the only mother I know, and I love you. And as long as I live, I will be here for you. And you can stay with me whenever." I said, "I love you, and I don't know anyone else to take you or your place, anything." And we hugged and we kissed, and so, and then the following year, my sister and brother-in-law and about 6 people came, the children and grandchildren. So 6 people came. They stayed for about 3 or 4 weeks. And my mother did meet them that Friday that they came. I didn't tell her till Thursday that they were coming Friday. So then she came after the beauty parlor, met them, had lunch, and then she left. And I asked her to stay, and she said, "No, I have to go." So then the next morning I get a phone call. It's my mom, and she said, "Paulette, I'd like to take Fortune and the children shopping, and then we'll have lunch at the club." And I said, "That's wonderful." So she got used to them and everything was fine, and they gave her gifts, and it was wonderful. Then the following year, 2 years later, my sister Jacqueline came with her husband, and I took them all over. We took them to Washington, Boston, everything, and down the shore, and my mother met them. And then 3 years later, my brother Jacques and Lillian came, and we did the same thing. We took them all over, Washington, New York, wherever. And they loved it. Jacques loved it here. Lillian didn't care for it. She wanted to go. She couldn't wait to get back. So, so that was So it was wonderful finally meeting my family. And then I sat and started getting information from different people. And that's how I got the book together. I got documents. I went to France. I went to the Paris Holocaust. Our picture is on the wall. Matter of fact, this picture is on the wall at the Holocaust Museum in Paris. And I have 3 beautiful children and 7 beautiful grandchildren I was blessed with. So I see them, and 2 live in Livingston and 1 lives in Cedar Grove. So I do see them. And this is my family that was killed in Auschwitz. And I'm on the bottom, though. But that was my mother and the 5 children that were killed. We were in Convoy 77. This is my mother in Algeria with her son who died there. This is my brother that wrote in the article about the nurse who saved my life. This was a town hall in, that's where my brother was put under the desk and when the Nazis came. And Mr. Carroll was our neighbor. He was the neighbor there. This is the French police and the Germans. This is Convoy, the truck 52, where my father was taken. My father's friend went to the restaurant and said, yeah, be careful because the Gestapos are coming. And he said, no, they're not going to take me. I have too many children. Meanwhile, a few days later, he's walking home from work, being a waiter, and the Gestapos grab him, throw him into Convoy 52, and they take him to Camp Drancy. No windows, no doors. It's a circular building. Today, it's an apartment house. And then he went to Ghetto Lublin, and from Ghetto Lublin, then he was killed in Sobibor, Camp Sobibor. He was there. This is the train that, the cattle car, which they called, and it held about 100 people. They didn't feed people on the train. People traveled for 4 or 5 days, and they were never fed on the train. I have Hitler in here. And also, there was another horrible man. They called him Angel of Death, they called him. And he killed a lot of children, the Angel of Death. Mengele, Dr. Mengele, that was him. Killing the children and doing experiments on twins. He was noted for twins, Dr. Mengele, yeah. And this is Camp Frasiers, where we went, in Camp Fraser's, we stayed there for about a month and a half, and they fed us 3 times a day. But then we left after. So I went with my sister Fortune, my sister Jacqueline, there. Find it. This is my sister Fortune and Michelle, that her second husband. Oh, here's Jacqueline here, and her daughter-in-law, and me. This is the orphanage here, the orphanage, teat mode, and we were playing outside. Here is my papers when I entered the orphanage, the OSE. This is my adoption paper here when I came to the United States. In Les Destrues, where my family lived, as I said, it was a Catholic village, and the mayor, years later, put a Jewish plaque in the Catholic cemetery. We are the only Jewish people, and it has my mother's names and the children who died during the Holocaust. And I admire the mayor for doing that. When I was adopted, this is the Queen Elizabeth that I came on in 48. We left in January and got there in February. This was my mother and father on the bottom here in America. This was the decorator here. Oh, and I do twinning. That's another thing. Should I show? I do twinning. I'll explain. Yeah. Twinning the temples or the JCC gets a child who's 12 years old, bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, and when they're 12, then it's called twinning with a Holocaust survivor. And what they do is they make a poster of the Holocaust survivor, they tell the story, they show pictures, and on Friday night, they show this at the temple, and on Saturday. And then Saturday, they put you into their speech. And then you get a certificate, twinning with a Holocaust survivor. This is the poster that one of the children did for twinning with a Holocaust survivor. It's a wonderful thing for the survivor and for the child. So I hope a lot more children do this. It's very important to not forget the Holocaust. This is the certificate you get when you do twinning with a Holocaust survivor. Oh, and I also spoke at Kushner, and it was called Names, Not Numbers. And what they do is they interview the Holocaust people, and then they make a movie. So every time they showed France, they would show me. If they showed Russia or another place, they would show the other Holocaust survivors. Oh, and in Livingston, they wrote an article about me, and this woman came in, came in 3rd place writing my story for the Livingston paper. Anne Frank, that's she has her story.
Yeah.
Good?
Yeah.
That's my engagement. This is my 3 children there, and my father up above. Here's my family. my my 3 children and their spouses. And here's all my grandchildren, 7 grandchildren. This is Eric, Brandon, and Zachary. And this is Rachel and Heather and I. My granddaughter Rachel wrote this. She is a grandma, or a mima they call me, that dresses fancy, works as a crossing guard, and is very social and enjoys life. She is a mima that is very busy, has friends, plays mahjong, goes to the movies once a week, and goes out to dinner all the time. She is a mima that makes time for her grandchildren, family, and her friends. She is always going somewhere or doing something. When she asked me to help her type a story of her life as a child, and among being a Holocaust survivor, I realized how lucky I am to be living the way I am, to have amazing parents, and now I look at my mima in a very special way. It said that. She wrote that in 6th grade, Rachel. Yeah. And this one is Cherie and Stephen and Jackie, my daughter-in-law. And this is Alan and I. And this is Chris and Donald. Oh, here we are celebrating my birthday, the grandchildren and children. This is Brian and his 2 brothers. They're twins, Zach and Brandon. This is my brother Jacques here. He was wonderful, wonderful man. Here's my brother and his wife Lillian. Here's my dad, Harry Wolfe. He was wonderful, and he was a printer. He had his own company in New York, my father. This is a quilt done, 16 Holocaust survivors made this quilt, and then it was shown in the Newark Museum, and we put it together, 16 of us. Mine is the second one here. What I did was I took a picture. I just want to read something from here. It's from this. I just received this book, this one, the Holocaust Chronicle. So it said, it was a denial of God, it was a denial of man, it was a destruction of the world in a miniature form, given the words of the book of the Holocaust Chronicle that's written in the book. The Holocaust, it's unthinkable someone could act this way to others. When I was adopted, I did not know where my family was and who they were. I forgot my family after I was put into the La Petite Mode, an orphanage in Paris, the OSE, Jewish. I did meet Mr. Job. He ran my orphanage and he ran my sister's orphanage, but he knew my sister better because she was older and I was younger. And when my sister went to the orphanage, she met her husband, and they waited till she was 18, and then they left the orphanage and they got married and lived in Paris and then Israel. I did not know about the Holocaust, sorry to say, until after I got married in '63. 1965, I went with my father, Harry Wolfe, to the French embassy, and that is when I found out my last name, Korssia, Korssia, and I was from Marseille, France. Then, in 1971, I had a French decorator. I just want to say, I forgot, my brother, he went to my sister's apartment, Fortune, and she and her husband had a disagreement, and my brother told, my brother-in-law told my brother he had to leave. He was only 15. He leaves and he goes to my uncle, my mother's brother, and he wanted food because he hadn't eaten. And my uncle said, "Do you have money?" And he said, "No." He says, "Well, I'm not going to feed you." The reason he wouldn't feed him was because growing up, my brother would not listen to him. So he wouldn't feed him. So he leaves, and as he's walking to the seaport, and there's a light fixture, and he's leaning on the light fixture, and across the street is a hotel and the opera house. And when he's leaning, he collapses. A little boy is looking outside the window, calls his mother, and his brother and sister come out. They pick up my brother Jacques, and they bring him to the hotel and into their apartment. And meanwhile, it's the owner of the apartment. She's Gentile, and she feeds him, she clothes him until he got married, and he called her Mama. I never met her. I never met the nurse either that saved my life to tell my story. I wish I did. In 2015, I was in Israel visiting my nephew, and on the table was a picture of my brother in a newspaper. And I said to my nephew, "What is this?" And he explained to me that the nurse that saved my life, he was telling the reporters. I wish I had met the nurse, but I didn't know till later, and I'm sure she passed, and I would love to meet her family. If anybody ever sees this in France, I would love it. But I thank her, and that's the only reason I'm here today, to tell this story. Oh, and when I came over from the orphanage, I forgot to say, they gave me a white rabbit fur coat and a white rabbit fur muff. So all my fur coats today, I have muffs to go with it. I guess I never forgot that. Let's see. How do I feel being a Holocaust survivor, which I didn't find out till years later? First, I am very proud of being a survivor. I am very, very saddened to learn about the Holocaust and 6 million Jewish people and the children who died because of being Jewish, and other people who died that were gay, gypsies, and other races. I feel sad for my family and other families that were taken for no reason. This was a nightmare for all the people and unforgiven for what was done to us. It was unforgettable, hateful act done by the Nazis and Hitler and his forces. We can never forget the Holocaust, the camps. It was a smoke screen in heaven. You couldn't breathe. It was a nightmare. We were thin and boneless and had no food and hardly able to stand or walk. How could anybody be so cruel to others? This was unthinkable. The people lost their lives, homes, families during this horrible nightmare. Horrible man called Hitler. I believe it teaches us to love one another, to show kindness in this world, and to respect one another, to try to understand, support one another, have patience, caring, show love to each other. I say life is too short for us to have hatred in us, fighting among us. We need consideration and understanding for one another. We need peace, love, and being together, united together. The world has too much hatred among people. It needs to be erased from this world. Respect, love is needed. We need to listen and learn about our fellow man to make our world a better place to live in. No more wars against nations, I pray, so we can live in peace and freedom among each other. The message to the Holocaust survivors, everybody, every human being has an obligation to contribute somehow to this world. You only have one life to live, and you have to be happy in your life, whatever it may be. Where there is no hope, one must invent hope. It is only pessimistic if you stop with the first half of the sentence and just say there is no hope. Even when it seems hopeless, I invent reasons to hope. The only thing that should separate us is laundry, nothing else. This is a poem, a legacy of an adopted child that I read every time I speak. Once there were two women who never knew each other. One you do not remember, the other you called mother. Two different lives shaped to make you one. One became your guiding star, the other became your sun. The first one gave you life, the second taught you to live it. The first gave you a need for love, the second was there to give it. One gave you a nationality, the other gave you name. One gave you a talent, the other gave you aim. One gave you emotions, the other calmed your fears. One saw your first sweet smile, the other dried your tears. One sought for you a home that she could not provide. The other prayed for a child, and whose hope was not denied. And now you ask me through the tears, the age-old question unanswered through the years. Hereditary or environment? Which are you a product of? Neither, my darling, neither. Just two different kinds of love. Thank you. Okay.
Bravo.